have a test on the Civil War. It just counts as your test, basically. It's a 100-point project. You will, however, see questions on it on your final. And at the very end, a copy of the rubric, which is the back page, you're just going to slip it in with your scrapbook when it's due at the end. Alright, other. The length of the finished product will vary as many of the required topics overlap and should be included on the same page. You are not required to have a separate page for each required topic, but all of the topics need to be included somewhere. And the physical size of the scrapbook is up to you. There's also some topics where you will need more than one page, right? So a super important battle, like the Battle of Gettysburg, you're going to have probably at least 2 pages for that. Okay? You will also be graded on creativity and organization, okay? You can organize it in the exact list that I gave you, okay? You can figure out another way of organizing it, but I shouldn't be reading about the end of the Civil War before you talk about the beginning, okay? So like all the extra stuff, like women in the Civil War, all of that, you can integrate wherever you want to, but there has to be some sort of order, especially for battles, okay? You can organize the battles from the Western Front and the Eastern Front, we'll talk about, but don't just throw all the pages in there, okay? You will lose points for that. Okay, next one is very important. This is a group project and you will receive a group grade. Okay? If there is a problem with a group member not doing their work, I need to know as soon as possible and before the project is handed in. Okay? After the project is handed in, the way I grade is final. You may not ask for a separate grade after it is handed in. Okay? So what I mean by that is there's some topics that overlap. So if you're talking about the Battle of Antietam, and you don't mention the Emancipation Proclamation, but somebody else does later on, your group still gets points for that. So if you come to me after I've already graded it, and you say, well, I did really awesome on all my topics, and so did really horrible, can I have a separate grade? I can't do that. Because most likely you got extra points thrown in there because your topic was mentioned somewhere else, or certain topics are easier than others. Okay? So your grade is a group. Okay? Now that being said, if a group member is really not doing their work, they're not completing what they're supposed to, as long as you talk to me ahead of time, I can separate your rubric. Okay? You notice the rubric is out of 235 points. I divide it, get a letter grade, and the letter grade goes in as a 100-point project. Right? So if you and everybody else in your group does what you're supposed to, but one person doesn't do anything, and you wind up with only 200 points, I could do it out of that, put in a letter grade, and figure it out separate. Okay? But again, if you don't talk to me beforehand, pretty much whatever is being handed in, I'm assuming it's okay to grade as one whole project. Okay? I would suggest having multiple deadlines for people in your group. Okay? So saying, okay, let's have our first 3 topics done by this day. Okay? And if somebody doesn't meet that first deadline, talk to me as soon as possible. Okay? You guys get to pick your own groups. I'm sure you're working with your friends. But I also know that sometimes some people don't do work. Okay? So please talk to me beforehand. This is a very large project. It's 100 points. Okay? I also don't want, one person winding up having to do everything because this project then becomes impossible. You really have to split it up. Okay? So topics should be split up evenly. Grades will also reflect the word. So if I'm going through and somebody's initials are pretty much on every single page, certain people in the group will lose points. Okay? There was an issue, for example, one year where one person did every single battle in the Civil War, every single person, and then the other 3 people did like 1 or 2 topics. You cannot do that. Okay? If you do that, you as an individual will lose points.
Let's say that like we split up the topics and everybody does their own topic, and then each person like goes over everybody else's work. Do you still initial that as you like working on it or no?
You mean like
Like if we all like read each other's work and like make a few changes on the.
So just put like the main person who works.
Okay.
But I would highly suggest it. I would
Yeah.
say the projects that come out the best are the ones where you lose yourselves a couple of days and you can go back through and say, wait, this doesn't make any sense. We need to go back and fix this, right? One group that did it really great last year, they actually kind of split the group in half, right? They took half the topics, the other two people took the other half, and they worked on them together, right? That way you at least have somebody checking your work, you have a sense of does what you're writing make sense, and things like that, right? I will also, when we go over the topics, I'll give you some suggestions on like certain battles that go together, so that way it's easier to split up. Okay, it must be in your own words and it must all be cited, right? Please see the back for what not to do. So plagiarism will result in a 0 on the entire project. So it doesn't matter if you hand in this whole big thing and if you've only plagiarized one paragraph, if I find it, you get a 0 for the whole thing. A 0 on a 100-point project, you're not going to be happy, I'm not going to be happy, please don't do it. Okay? You're getting enough time, and again, you're getting about 2 weeks to work on this project, right? And yes, okay, I've had issues in the past. It's a mess dealing with it right before finals, right before the end of school. And if you notice somebody in your group is doing this, just let me know. Right? So that way I can talk to you before it's handed in. Okay? If there's issues going on before it's handed in, there's no problem. I can talk to you, we can fix it. Once you hand it in to me, and it is any of these issues, there's going to be a problem. Okay? So everything on here is a list of things you cannot do. Okay? You cannot, for example, I gave you some information on the top there. You may not just take the entire chunk offline, put quotes around it, and say, well, that's my description of that battle. Okay? You also cannot, okay, what's the problem with the second one? Or this one? Yeah.
You switched out some words, but I kept the structure of the sentence.
Right? So also do not do that. Right? If you just change a couple of words, like it says the first big instead of major, that is also an issue. Okay? The third one, okay, where you just say the first battles will run and then still put quotes around things, that's not quite plagiarism, but it's also not what you should be doing. I should not see any quotes in this project. You need to think about what you've read and explain it in your own words. Okay? I of course understand you're talking about battles. You can't rewrite certain things like Grant without a battle, but still within reason. Right? The only times I should see quotes is if you are, quoting something from the Emancipation Proclamation or something like that. Really, everything you should cite it because you're getting this information from somewhere, but you should not be pulling out quotes because you don't know how to reword something and putting it into a scrapbook. Okay? Even worse than that, though, is just not including quotes. But we'll deal with that in a minute. Make sense? Alright, guys. Next part. I'm going to go through each of these topics. This is probably the most important part to write things down for. I'm going to tell you certain things to focus on for each of these problems or things that people have left out in the past. So, write it down as we go along. Okay. The required topics, the first one, a map of the U.S. showing the Confederate States, U.S. and border states. Make sure it's colored, okay? A black and white where everything looks gray doesn't show anything, okay? There is a colored printer in this room, okay? So you guys can use the printer in here too. Make sure it's labeled, okay? And even something like this would need a little caption. You don't, of course, then need a whole paragraph. It's just a map, but you would still need a little caption. One thing I know a lot of people have forgotten is a key, okay? So make sure you have a key for the map. Okay, next thing, formation of the Confederacy. How is it formed? When is it formed? Why is it formed? You can use just the information I gave you in the lecture. You don't have to do any outside research for that one. You just have to summarize what I talked about. Okay? But then in your works cited at the end, you would include a citation from my lecture. Okay? Right, new states added to the Union. Okay? I'm going to tell you the 3 that were added, so that way you can research about them. There's no confusion. Which one we've already talked about?
West Virginia.
West Virginia, what's another? Kansas, good. Okay, Kansas is technically, at the end of January or February, right after those first states seceded, but still include them, okay? And the third one is Nevada. So southern and northern advantages, both economic and military. Okay, a lot of people have done this in a chart, and that's perfectly fine, but you want to still be extensive. Don't just write one advantage on each side and call it a day. Okay? There's also, I will warn you, southern advantages are a little bit harder to find, but I promise that there are some. Right? So make sure that you look those up. Your textbook is actually pretty good on this topic. So you might just want to use the textbook if you wind up with this one. Okay? The other thing is make sure you do both economic and military. Okay? The best way is a lot of people have done a chart where it says north and south, and then both categories are on there. So that way it's nice and clear. Okay? Military and economic strategies. Okay? Again, both for the north and the south. So for military, I will tell you for the north, there's a plan you're going to find called the Anaconda, like the snake, Anaconda plan. There's 3 different steps to it. That's very important. Okay? Their other plan that they use later on in the war is called War of Attrition. Okay? You also want to look that up and make sure you find that. And you also want to talk about, because it's a military strategy, conscription. That would be like drafts and things like that. Okay? You also need to talk about their goal. So this is their strategy, right? What is their military goal? Okay? There's going to be a different goal for the north versus the south. Make sure you talk about that as well. Okay? For the south, right, talk about their goal, talk about drafting. They really kind of have 2 different strategies you're going to find. Okay? But when you're looking for it, make sure that you find 2 different strategies that they try to employ. For the north. Guys, I cannot stress enough that you should be writing this down as we go along, okay? Especially if you're missing the stuff that I'm telling you as we go over it, you'll definitely lose points for this stuff, okay? And do not assume that certain people will be in your group. While I'm letting you pick, if you don't get here early enough on Monday, it's like what happened the other day, it's kind of whoever signed up first. Okay. Alright, economic strategies. What is economic strategies? Okay, so it could be, right, it could be like starving off the other side, making sure that they can't get goods, okay, so it could be a blockade. It's also, how are they going to pay for the war, okay? So something like the north, or really the south, you'd have to look up, are they going to have new taxes? Are they going to print out more money? There's some significant laws that go along with that as well. Okay, still have one, what? This is still under military and economic strategies, okay? So for both, the South is going to do it differently from the North, but basically, how are they paying for this expensive war? Yes? Yeah. You'll see that for some of them, you'll be able to put them on the same page, but for others, you'll have like a couple. Alright, the battles. Okay, for it, it's up there. It's very simple. You use what I taught you, okay? You don't have to look up anything extra. Alright, so in general, this is what you need to include for the battles. Okay? And a lot of people